Welcome, everybody. We are so excited to have you here today for today's pro-choice check-in. For those people who haven't been on before, I am Becca Hart. I'm the Executive Director of NARAL Pro-Choice Massachusetts, the Commonwealth's leading grassroots advocacy organization for reproductive freedom. And to those who joined us last week and the week before, welcome back. We're so glad to have you here. We had a fabulous conversation last week with Stephanie Tody from the Lawyering Project about the future of abortion access under the COVID bans and under the Supreme Court case June v. Russo. And it's so great to see familiar names from week to week. It's an encouraging sign that we're doing something right. And so we really are grateful for your continued support. And I want to extend a really warm welcome to our friends from Missouri and Texas who are in the audience today and from all over. I'm seeing lots of state names that we don't normally get in the chat box, which is exciting. And I think a really strong testament to our movement, because we can bring people from all over the country together in support of reproductive freedom. So a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into the interesting stuff. As you can see, we're using webinar mode in Zoom. So the video and audio feeds are muted for everybody except our panelists. And we're doing this because of the proliferation of Zoom bombing, which you've probably heard about in the news. We'd much rather see your faces and have a more interactive experience, but we've been working really hard to make this as interactive as we can. So Kate Freilich, who you heard, I like to call her the voice of God as I'm preparing for these. Kate is working behind the scenes to make this as interactive an experience as is possible. So to the right of your screen, you will find a chat box. And if you are having any technical issues, use the chat box to let us know, and we'll do our best to help you out. And in the middle of your screen towards the bottom, you'll see a question and answer icon. And if at any point you have questions for our special guests, you can submit them there. We'll save time at the end to answer your questions. So be sure to send them in throughout our conversation, and we'll do our very best to get to all of them. And then Kate will come on screen towards the end to help us facilitate the question and answer session. I also want to remind you to follow us on social media. You can find links to our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts in the chat box. That's how you stay up to date on all future events, upcoming check-ins, and any important updates and announcements about reproductive freedom in Massachusetts. And make sure to stay till the very end of the webinar for some calls to action, and I'll give you a heads up about next week's guests for the pro-choice check-in. And with that, I think we're ready to go. So when the full force of the COVID-19 pandemic began to hit the United States, I think all of us in the movement really knew that it posed a significant threat to reproductive freedom. We believed that states hostile to abortion access would use the pandemic to exacerbate existing barriers to abortion access. And that has unfortunately proven true. Barriers are even more challenging to overcome in this kind of social quarantining world that we're in. And we know that anti-choice politicians have used this crisis as a means to further their political agendas to ban abortion care with complete disregard for the health and safety of abortion patients. Advocating for abortion access in predominantly anti-choice states like Missouri and Texas is difficult enough under normal circumstances, and adding a global pandemic to the equation poses a huge challenge. But in the face of these tremendous odds, advocates in Missouri, in Texas, and many other states have been working around the clock to protect reproductive freedom, and have really scored some major victories along the way, including increases in access to telemedicine, and most recently in Texas, where the Attorney General announced last week that the state was lifting its ban on abortion during the pandemic. I know I breathed a huge sigh of relief when I saw that. I had to read that twice when I saw it because I couldn't believe it when I saw it on the New York Times website. So today we're going to dig deeper into the work of our colleagues in Missouri and Texas to learn how they cope with those barriers on a daily basis, and how the COVID-19 pandemic has really changed their work. So let me introduce our two special guests, and then we'll get to the conversation. So Mallory Schwartz is the Executive Director of NARAL Pro-Choice Missouri. Mallory has strong Missouri roots and years of experience with strategic advocacy and lobbying for reproductive freedom. Prior to her role with NARAL, Missouri, she served as the Federal Affairs Manager for the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, where she oversaw a portfolio of reproductive health policy issues and regularly engaged with federal leaders in support of ACOG's policy positions. She was also the Director of Government Relations for Republican Majority for Choice, a political action committee that worked to make pro-choice policies part of the GOP's official platform. Mallory started in this position about 6 months ago, is that right, Mallory? And she's just been a tremendous addition to the NARAL ED network, and I feel very lucky to call her a friend. And Aimee Arrambide is the Executive Director of NARAL Pro-Choice Texas and is nothing short, in my opinion, of an absolute inspiration. She is a Texas native who inspired to become an advocate for reproductive freedom and social justice by her dad, who was an abortion provider in her home state. She's an accomplished writer. She co-wrote and edited the Public Leadership Institute's Playbook for Abortion Rights, and her writing has appeared in Bustle and in Rewire. She just had a great Q&A published, I think it was in Ms. Magazine just last week. She serves on the Repro Action Advisory Council and is a National Network of Abortion Funds We Testify storyteller. So Mallory and Aimee, thank you so much for coming today. We're so delighted to have you. And let's dive in. So I wanted to just start off by seeing if the two of you could describe the landscape of abortion access in both of your states before the pandemic. And I'm thinking kind of generally about barriers, how many providers, how do people, real people, actually access abortion care? And maybe Mallory, we'll start with you.
Sure. The short answer is that most people cannot access abortion care in Missouri. We have one remaining provider that's here in St. Louis City, which is where I'm located and where the NARAL Missouri office is. And I should have started by saying thank you so much, Becca, and thank you the NARAL Missouri team, and thank you and hello to Aimee. I'm so excited to be here to talk about this and appreciate the opportunity to talk about the state of access in Missouri and how we are holding up during this crisis. So that said, we have very limited access in the state. There is one remaining provider here in St. Louis City, but that means most of our state outside of, I don't know if you have seen a picture of the Missouri map, but St. Louis is right over here in one corner and the rest of the state is majority rural and has to drive several hours to get here. We have trap laws on trap laws on trap laws that have been enacted over the past decade. There is a 72-hour waiting period. There is parental consent and two-parent notification. Last summer, the State Department of Health, so not the legislative body, but the State Department of Health, placed a requirement that before any abortion, a patient must have a medically unnecessary pelvic exam. This led to Planned Parenthood, our last remaining Planned Parenthood that provides abortions, to say that they would no longer provide medication abortions because they didn't want patients to have what we are called state-sanctioned sexual assault to get an unnecessary pelvic exam before you're able to access abortion care. And so really any barrier that you can think of, we have at least considered and likely enacted. We do have 2 clinics available just across the river, we say just across state lines in Illinois. We have an independent abortion clinic, Hope Clinic for Women, and a Planned Parenthood center that opened up last fall to meet the increased need. We are so grateful to have those providers there, just about a 20-minute drive from where I am in St. Louis, but still several hours for folks coming across the state. And those clinics see at different, they've both told us that their numbers have skyrocketed as access has decreased in Missouri. And they see maybe 2/3 of their patients are Missourians. And so, again, we are grateful for them, and we are seeing Missourians get access to the care that they deserve and need in Illinois. Missouri has a supermajority in the House and Senate, meaning a veto-proof Republican majority, as well as a Republican in the highest office, the governor. Last summer, our supermajority passed and the governor signed an 8-week abortion ban. And that ban is currently being held up by the courts. And so we are awaiting a decision to see whether it will go into effect and what that would mean for our last clinic. But the state health department has also been directly attacking the last remaining clinic, the Planned Parenthood, saying that they don't meet the requirements for their license. This is obviously targeted, and that has been challenged in court also. And so there's a lot of things that are kind of hanging in the balance right now, but we are grateful to have those providers that we do have.
Mallory, is the 72-hour waiting period a 2-trip requirement, or are you able to do some of the counseling on the phone before you have to make the several-hour trip to the provider?
Thanks, that's a great question. It's a 2-trip requirement. We also have same provider consent, which means that you have to go in and have the doctor who's going to perform your abortion, or the person that's going to perform your abortion, read you this mandatory description, mandatory documents that are not medically accurate, are not factual. So you have to be read this document, you have to consent to that provider, and then you have to come back 72 hours later. And so, you know, if you are someone coming from a rural part of the state, you already have to try to get childcare or figure out how to find a place to stay for 4 days, need to find transportation. All of these barriers really add up when you have to come twice. It also is it's also a hard thing for the provider. I've talked with providers here who've said that they were sick, like really sick one day, and that meant any patients that they had consented 3 days prior, they stayed home sick, and those patients all would have to come back 2 more times. And also, you know, then they're a week farther in their pregnancy, and maybe they no longer meet the requirement. Maybe they're no longer able to get an abortion in the state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess the only silver lining about having clinics in Illinois who serve so many Missourians is that they don't have to adhere to the 2-trip requirement, right? I mean,
absolutely. Illinois is definitely something of an abortion oasis here in the Midwest. And it is fortunate that folks can go there for access, but of course we know that not everyone has that ability, and particularly folks that are low income, particularly communities of color who may not have the resources that they need to get there. For them, they already have no access.
Aimee, let's transition to you. So describe Texas before the COVID-19 pandemic.
Sure. First, I want to start by saying thank you so much, Becca and NARAL Pro-Choice Massachusetts, for having us, for me, today. And thanks to Mallory for all the work that you do in Missouri, because I completely relate to a lot of what you said. As many of y'all probably remember, back in 2013, during Wendy Davis's filibuster and the enactment of HB2, a lot of our clinics had to close. So back in 2013, we had 45 clinics, and since then we have about 20 to 22. So before COVID started, we had 22 providers for a state as large as Texas with a population of 27 million, and we have 254 counties. So you can imagine like how spread thin abortion access actually is. In addition to that, we have several of the same restrictions or similar restrictions to Missouri. We have a 24-hour waiting period, mandatory counseling session in clinic with the same provider. We have a physician-only rule. We have mandated right to know pamphlet that they need to be given, full of medical inaccuracies. Medication abortion is not allowed to be telemedicine, requires in-person follow-up appointments, and so on and so forth. We have quite a few restrictions that make it inaccessible to begin with, but then with COVID, things just got so much worse. But yeah, I think that one of the things I will say about Texas is that while we have so many restrictions, while there are so few providers, that the majority of Texans do support abortion access. And because of that, there have been so many abortion funds that have either been created since 2013, have been doing work for the past decade or so, who have stepped up and made it a little more accessible for Texans, which has been great.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I should have mentioned at the top, and I forgot to do this in my remarks, just that all three of us have kids. So if you see a kid wander in, just roll with it. We're all like you, stuck at home. So it's possible you'll see a tiny human wander in. All right, Mallory, so tell us a little bit about how the COVID-19 pandemic has changed abortion access in Missouri. And one of the, I'm interested in the policy ramifications and kind of what you're hearing, but I also would love to hear about the day-to-day of how people are actually accessing care.
Yeah, thank you, Becca. Unlike in Texas and Ohio and in some other places, we've actually been surprised to see no additional restrictions placed on abortion in connection with the COVID-19 crisis. That said, our governor and Republican state leadership have failed across the board at taking any timely or sufficient action to protect any of our state from this health pandemic. We were one of the last states in the country to issue a shelter in place. And we just heard yesterday that our governor, Mike Parson, plans to reopen the state next Monday, May 4th, and is lifting all restrictions on the size of group gatherings. And so throughout this crisis, what he has said is that healthcare providers and businesses can make the determination themselves on what they need to stay safe. And so we know that we have seen the Planned Parenthoods in state that provide, the number of them that provide services beyond abortion, access to STI tests and cancer screenings and birth control. They have consolidated into a fewer number of clinics, and they have consolidated hours. And our Planned Parenthood recently launched a telemedicine telehealth program in the past couple of weeks to ensure folks can still get the support that they need. But the clinic in St. Louis is still up and running. Likewise, Hope Clinic for Women in Illinois has still been up and providing abortions. And they have taken the necessary steps in clinic to protect their providers and their patients, including temperature checks, including not having folks wait in waiting rooms with other people, and the same kind of things I'm sure a lot of us have heard. They're taking the necessary precautions that our state is refusing to take.
And do you have any sense of why the governor didn't act to try to ban abortion care? I have to say, I've been doing this work for a long time, including in the southern United States, and Missouri, arguably southern, maybe not southern, is a state that I typically see a lot of kind of testing by the anti-choice movement. So I was really surprised that that abortion wasn't, they didn't try to ban it. What's your sense of why that happened?
We were also surprised, and there has been no shortage of Republican legislators calling on the governor to ban it. So there is still those feelers of the anti-choice movement who are pushing for that restriction. My feeling is that the governor was following Trump and taking a very hands-off, this is not so serious, a very kind of libertarian approach to the entire crisis, and that pursuing a restriction on abortion within that would have been so out of place when there are so few other restrictions right now, that they, I guess, chose to stay totally hands off. That's all that I can think that it could be.
It's surprising, really surprising. Aimee, you must have whiplash from what has been happening in Texas since, what was it, middle of March that that the ban was enacted. So would love to kind of have you walk us through what happened in Texas and how COVID has changed abortion access. And I know there's the legal policy, but also I'm really interested in the real people's lives who've been impacted. So I'd love to hear about that too.
Sure. Essentially, since March 22nd, when the governor first introduced his first executive order, which banned non-essential healthcare, he didn't mention abortion. That's kind of when everything started, our confusion, the public's confusion. The next day, the Attorney General issued a press release with guidance saying that abortion would be included or not included as essential healthcare. So it was banned essentially. And first of all, that was kind of unprecedented because he did it through a press release. So no one really knew how to interpret that. But second of all, yeah, it was just kind of, we didn't know exactly what was going on from there. A couple days later, clinics filed in the court asking for a stay, an injunction from that. And basically for the next 4 weeks, things went back and forth between the federal court, the Fifth Circuit, back to the AG, back to the governor. And without getting into all the wonky legal discussion, it just confused everyone on the ground. Not only did people have abortion appointments one day, they were canceled the next, only to be rescheduled the next. Then there were exceptions for medication abortion. So some people had access to medication abortion, but only up to 10 weeks. And then also if they were closing in on the 20-week gestational limit in Texas. So then you had a whole group of people that fell within that 10-week gap that didn't have access to abortion care. And all of the different like iterations of the ban were very nuanced. So what we had was a public and providers, to be quite frank, that were confused about exactly what should and shouldn't be accessible. And so for about 5 weeks time, we basically had no access to regular abortion care, which is the longest period of time we've ever been since Roe v. Wade without abortion care accessible. And for many that came, like the relief that we got last week came too late because they're past the 20-week point at this point, and so they have to travel out of state. Many of them don't have the funds to travel out of state, so that's not even an option. Some of them have been forced to have the pregnancy despite their wishes. And it's just been utter chaos and, like you said, whiplash, because one day we think things are going well and the federal court sides with us, and the next day the Fifth Circuit is not siding with us. But what we do know is that obviously this wasn't motivated remotely in any sort of pretense of like caring for Texans' health and well-being, because what we pivoted to ask the governor and the state officials is to lift the restrictions that are currently in place. If they could allow for telemedicine for medication abortion, if they could remove the mandated multiple visits, if they could make abortion accessible through not just physicians, but other advanced practice clinicians. These are all things that would actually increase availability, increase access, and hopefully keep people safe from COVID. But that is not what our government is doing. In fact, just like Missouri, Governor Abbott is opening Texas back up. So that's what we have to look forward to.
So
but basically,
frustrating.
Yeah, it's just caused a lot of confusion and a lot of people just not knowing what to expect the next day. When we heard relief last week, we were all kind of like, when's the next, or when's the other shoe going to drop? Like, when are they going to take it away from us? Because we just, we don't know.
So, I know in the wake of HB2, I think it was IBIS Reproductive Health did a study led by Dan Grossman about the increase in self-managed abortion for people in Texas when, the restrictions closed over half of your clinics. And so I'm curious if you're seeing a similar increase, or at least you're hearing on the ground. I don't know if there's been enough time to collect data, but you're hearing on the ground if there has been a similar increase in self-managed abortion, and do you have any sense of whether people are able to access information to get that care for themselves safely, what the outcomes are?
We have heard that that's most likely where people are turning. Obviously, and I'm not sure the audience knows, but self-managed abortion can be very safe and is, as long as you follow the World Health Organization protocols. And that is what the researchers have said, is that as abortion has become less accessible in Texas, that is where people turn.
Yeah, I know anecdotally we've even heard that in Massachusetts, and we have barriers to care. We have 24-week ban, and then we have one parent consent. But we do know, at least anecdotally, that there has been some increase in self-managed abortion because people are scared. They're scared to go in, and they don't know what is and isn't accessible.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about a time of such economic uncertainty as we're experiencing now, with people not sure if they're going to have a job or whether or not they can take care of their families. Like, it's really cruel to expect people to continue pregnancy when they just aren't ready or willing or want to.
Yeah, and I think, of course, there was a great article, I think it was in Essence, about how disproportionately women of color are essential workers right now. And if I'm not mistaken, this article focused on Texas. correct me if I'm wrong, Aimee, but the fact that women of color are disproportionately essential workers in Texas, and yet they cannot, they can't vindicate their constitutional rights if they decide not to carry a pregnancy to term. And the impact is, I think, pretty startling and pretty revealing of what the actual political, it's not a public health motivation, it's a political motivation to prevent abortion.
Exactly. I will say, though, that I think people have become more aware of exactly what these restrictions do to abortion access. I think before, people didn't necessarily understand the purpose of the mandatory multiple in-person visits. They didn't understand the purpose of the waiting period, or actually the effect that those restrictions have. And I think they're starting to understand that. So that's one positive thing that's coming out.
Yeah. Mallory, can you talk a little bit about clinic protesters in Missouri and how they have reacted to the pandemic, or haven't reacted to the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. Clinic protests. So NARAL Pro-Choice Missouri runs the clinic escort program for the 3 clinics I spoke of. Our Planned Parenthood here in Illinois, an independent clinic, and our Planned Parenthood here in Missouri, and an independent and Planned Parenthood clinics in Illinois. And we sent our escorts home right before the end of March, seeing that their presence was increasing their own risk as well as the patient risk, and not wanting them to be in that position. Unfortunately, the protesters haven't taken similar precautions. The Missouri shelter in place didn't go into effect until April 6th, and it was at least a week after that where protesters finally stopped showing up at the St. Louis Planned Parenthood. But the two groups are relationally, the St. Louis group, they try to trick patients that come from not going to their appointments. They wear pink vests, so folks think they are with the clinic rather than protesters. They are kind of a different breed of protesters, and so they stopped showing up. But on the Illinois side, we have the more typical, what you see in photos, aggressive folks with big images of fetal parts, and they shout more, and they're just generally more aggressive. And those folks have been showing up in numbers more than 10 regularly and continuously, despite the shelter in place now in both states. And so we have not seen them slow down, and it's awful, and it feels terrible because we know that the clinic escorts are so valued in the work that they do, and the patients and the providers equally really appreciate them being there and them being a barrier between that person seeking care and that person's companion often, and the protesters, the aggressive anti-choice protesters. And they're not there right now, but we felt that was the right decision for us to make to protect everyone's safety. And it's too bad that the other side isn't taking a similar approach. And we've seen instances of even more aggression and really despicable actions like coughing on providers or patients that we saw our counterpart in North Carolina. And so we're definitely not alone in it, but it's tough for sure. And they haven't let up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to underestimate the power of escorts for patients when they're walking into clinics, because it can be, depending on where you are, it can be a very, very scary situation to navigate protesters. And, I think you made absolutely the right call, but it is a really hard call to make, certainly. Aimee, how about protesters in Texas?
Sure. So the protesters that we have that are pretty bad focus on our clinic in McAllen and a clinic in Fort Worth. And my understanding is they were pretty bad at the beginning of the COVID crisis, and they started to kind of wane off as things got more serious and as things were like implementing shelter in place. That being said, a lot of them were during the times when abortion was banned for a couple of days without relief, they would be calling the medical board and putting in complaints about abortion clinics, kind of, asserting that clinics were providing abortions when they shouldn't be, et cetera, and causing kind of havoc in that way. And then the other thing is, in Texas, we have over 200 CPCs, crisis pregnancy centers, or fake clinics. So they outnumber us 10 to 1 in terms of clinics to CPCs, and they get a lot of money from the state government. So they were all open during this time period and continuing their disinformation campaign and giving people inaccurate information when people were already confused trying to access abortion care this time. So that is something that we always contend with, but I think that during this uncertain time, they kind of made things exponentially worse.
Yeah. What about fake women's health centers in Missouri, Mallory?
Yeah, 200 is a real wild number.
Astounding.
Yeah. We have 74 here, though, at our last count and tracking. And so, yeah, it's equally abrasive. Our state has a population of just over 6 million. And so it's a huge number. And likewise, they get a lot of taxpayer dollars. The estimated number in 2018 was around $9 million. And so they have still been operating. I actually was doing a little research and I saw that on some of their websites, they are describing themselves and suggesting that they have, well, I'll just read this quote I have from one. "We have been deemed an essential healthcare provider, which means we meet and exceed all clinical best practices to serve you safely." So I don't know that that's actually a designation that our state has been giving out, the essential healthcare provider. And so they've deemed themselves that, and are making all sorts of generalizations or implications about what that means and their ability to serve patients safely. NARAL Missouri has in previous years done a kind of secret shopper study to figure out the kinds of things that they tell patients, and I'm sure that's the same kind of thing all across the country, in terms of the deceptive information and connections and false non-existent connections between abortion and cancer. And so we know they are still up and running, and our state legislature is in session this week. They are supposed to be passing the budget, and we can only expect that there will be more funding that goes to them.
In Massachusetts, our ratio is 3 to 1. We have 33, 34 clinics, depending on how you count some of the mobile clinics. And we have done some research into whether or not they've been open. And we actually know that they've been physically closed, but they're still fielding phone calls, which is, it's interesting because fake women's health centers, they're a huge network across the country. They do not operate in isolation. And their backbone is really a lot of funding by religious institutions. And of course, the dollars that they get from the state, especially in license plate programs, like the Choose Life programs, including in Massachusetts. So I wish I'd love to be a fly on the wall and kind of figure out why it felt politically palatable to them to, stay open in Texas and stay open, physically open in Texas and Missouri and not here. It's a curiosity to me that they didn't do that here. I was really shocked that they didn't. I want to kind of transition into advocacy and elections a little bit. So I'm curious, maybe you could just give us the 35,000-foot view of your legislative cycles. I know they're really different than Massachusetts, and just talk about how you're thinking about advocacy differently since the COVID-19 pandemic. Maybe Aimee, I'll start with you.
Sure. So Texas has a legislative session that meets every other year. So we met in 2019 and we'll be meeting in 2021. We have the Senate is majority anti-abortion, and so is the House currently, but we believe we can flip 9 seats and at the very least have a majority in the House so that we can stop any bad bills from going forward. At the legislature, the anti-abortion movement has been increasing the number of anti-abortion bills they introduce each year, kind of tenfold since probably about 2005, to the point where last year they introduced about 45 bills, but we were able to stop the majority of them. They did, however, introduce one particularly egregious bill that would have given any person that seeks abortion or the provider the death penalty. So that was just kind of what a couple of our legislators feel is appropriate, which is just mind-boggling. That being said, we've done a pretty good job defeating the majority of what they introduced. This year, they did manage to pass a so-called Born Alive bill, which was pretty devastating. However, we were able to get the supportive abortion advocate legislators to register a present not voting vote in kind of protest, and then to give a great speech on the floor. Representative Donna Howard, who is a nurse and very experienced medically, was able to talk about how just how horrible the so-called Born Alive bill is and how not based on medical fact it was. So I thought that was a pretty good way to combat that horrible bill.
Aimee, can you tell our listeners who maybe don't know, aren't in the weeds about Born Alive bills, like give us the 101 on what they are and why they're so insidious?
Sure. A Born Alive bill makes the assertion that sometimes when an abortion happens that a baby might be alive at the end of the abortion. We know that this is not based in medical fact. This does not happen. And then they further assert that the abortion provider needs to kill the baby after it's been born alive. We know that this is something that does not happen. It's not based on medical fact, but they use this and use their assertion of this to spread these medical inaccuracies and to pass bills that basically would provide criminal penalties to abortion providers if someone could claim that. And so they're particularly egregious.
I was going to say, I think a really important part of these bills is that anti-choice politicians know that they're not based in fact. It's not how abortion care works. But it is a way to kind of insert into the public discourse the fact that abortion providers in their minds are murderers. They are trying to prevent them from being seen as legitimate clinicians, and it is a very, very insidious tool of the anti-choice movement.
Well, not only that, but it puts a target on abortion providers' backs, basically saying that they commit infanticide, right? We have infanticide laws that prevent any sort of babies from getting killed. Like, these bills do absolutely nothing legally that isn't already taken care of through infanticide laws. But not only that, it's just something that doesn't happen. But they're able to use it to spread their lies, and they're successful at it. So yeah, that's one of the bills that did pass this year. But luckily it was one of the very few that passed. And every year we've been doing a pretty good job creating a pro-choice, proactive agenda that could kind of draw attention to the hypocrisy of the anti-abortion movement, that could try to lift up other values that we have, such as like paid leave and paid sick and making sure people have access to healthcare, et cetera. And then also just other bills that expand access to abortion care and protect abortion care. So we feel pretty confident that we've done a good job at the legislature given the makeup. However, due to gerrymandering and redistricting, every 10 years, the way the state is divided is just not remotely adhering to any sort of pro-choice values or anything that makes sense. The districts are divided like this, they don't really make sense, and that's what's been happening. And that's the reason why we started our electoral program back in the fall. And so far we've endorsed a total of 3 candidates. We just released an endorsement on Monday. And we're super excited, but we feel like we can't do the legislative work if we can't elect more abortion advocates to the legislature, especially in the House. So that's kind of where we've pivoted our role in the state of Texas. Sorry, that was kind of a long explanation.
It's good that it sounds like there's, no, it's great. I think it's exciting that there's reason to be hopeful that, you guys could build a wall in the House and really prevent those really horrible, insidious bills from becoming law.
Yeah, the endorsement that we released on Monday is actually for a challenger for a Democrat who has been in office for about 30 years in our Texas Senate and two terms before that in the House, and always votes with the anti-abortion people, but he's a progressive. So we're really excited about this challenger because they have recently talked about how abortion is one of their key issues. They've put it on their website. They've committed to taking our Let's Talk About Abortion training so that they can speak about abortion in a more positive way and advocate it for it in their community. And then they've committed to, if being elected, to protecting and expanding abortion care. So we're super excited.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Our fingers will be very crossed for you. Mallory, same question for you. So what do you think, tell us about the legislative process and kind of how is the pandemic making you think differently about your work, both legislative and electoral?
Yeah, great question. So our session is annually January to May. In the past couple of years, they have tacked on a special session at the end where they have done almost exclusively anti-abortion work. That is during which the ban passed last May. This year, before all of this happened and before we all went to working from home, we were tracking more than 24 anti-choice bills. Although I will say this session, legislators took a big hit last summer after passing the abortion ban. And I had heard that there was less appetite maybe for moving abortion-related legislation. And instead they turned to attacks on the LGBTQIA community. And they were advancing legislation targeting transgender folks, particularly targeting the institution of marriage, because if queer people can have it, then none of us can. And so it was really remarkable what they were spending their time on. I'm really glad that Aimee talked so much about so-called Born Alive, because our session is back in today. They had all gone home due to concerns about social distancing, as they should have. And the Missouri State House came back last week because they have technically until May 8th to pass their budget for the next year. And they came back earlier to pass a supplemental budget. And the House was in yesterday and is in today, supposed to be passing and sending a budget to the Senate side. The Senate they should go into session at 2. So in about 15 minutes for us is my understanding. But on their informal calendar today is Born Alive. So while they have brought folks in to be specifically addressing concerns related to this public health crisis, while they are supposed to be doing the one task of passing a budget bill, they are planning to focus on abortion. And so anything that I may have heard or thought in terms of them not wanting to keep so much attention on this issue or not focus on controversial items is we'll see if it happens. So that's something I've got. Our team has one ear on the Senate today to see what happens.
Well, we'll make sure to get you out on time. I need to be focused on that. Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's, God, I mean, I would be shocked, but it's not shocking at all, right? Of course, they're taking it up today. It's so frustrating, and I'm sorry that you are dealing with that on top of everything else. So I want to be mindful of time. We're a couple minutes over when I wanted to start the Q&A. I'm going to ask you both one last question and then open it up, and I'll give you a minute each. But you're just both and you and your teams are doing such incredible work, and I'm so in awe of all of the progress that you have and the power that you have built in your states. And I'm curious how you are staying strong right now. What's getting you through these days? How about Aimee, you go first.
I think that I keep going because, one, I know that the majority of Texans support abortion access. That's been reiterated poll after poll. And I know that Texans are also some of the strongest advocates and resilient advocates I've ever met. After HB2, like, so many abortion funds popped up so that they could help people with travel and accommodations and logistics to get abortion access when our clinic numbers were diminished. And I just think that working with these people at my office and allied organizations, our partners throughout, they're just some of the most passionate people, and that's what keeps me going. Because I know we can do it. We can succeed. We just have to continue fighting and be strategic. yeah, that's what keeps me going. Otherwise, I would be a Lego master builder, I think.
A lot of value in that too. How about you, Mallory?
I want to reiterate that polling in Missouri has likewise shown, right, poll after poll, that the majority of Missourians, like the 7 in 10 Americans, support access to abortion. And I think something that is keeping me going in this time is knowing that this is a continued need and an increased need, and also seeing something that we're seeing in the state is and we're seeing nationwide is the disproportionate impact this crisis is having on Black communities. And St. Louis particularly, and the state has a long history of not being there and not supporting the Black community in the state and in the city. And so we are seeing and working to figure out how we can lift up the voices of communities of color locally and do what we can to educate folks on the importance of reproductive justice, and taking this honestly as an organizing opportunity to reach people where they are. And it's been really exciting. My team is just kick ass, and I am so proud and impressed by them. We have done a dozen virtual events in the 6 weeks that we've been home, and they really jumped into it head first. And so I am really excited about the work that we're going to be able to continue doing and the way that we can work to fold in and be a stronger progressive movement in the state. Honestly, I'm also happy a little bit to be home because my son is 18 months, and I almost never got to be home to see him before this. And so I don't, it's hard for sure, but I don't hate that.
Yeah, I understand that feeling. It's a double-edged sword. Okay, I'm over a time, so I'm going to ask Kate to hop on and give us some questions.
Yeah, hi. Thank you both. That was really, really cool to hear about. We'll jump right in. We have a lot of really great questions. The first one is really, how can we support you all in Texas and Missouri? How can we support both your organization and people seeking abortion access in your states?
I mean, obviously, you could give us money. That's just something that's universally helpful. Supporting local abortion funds is also super helpful. We have a lot. We have about 9 or 10 in Texas, ranging anywhere from regional ones to practical support ones, to ones that provide local support. So supporting abortion funds is incredibly important. Supporting your NARAL in your state, especially the political work they do, it's not as, exciting necessarily to donate to the political work, but it's just as important, especially in states like Texas, where we need to flip the house to protect anything that we have. Right now, at least at NARAL Pro-Choice Texas, we have like this whole virtual class schedule that we're preparing, so people could do yoga, sign up for a sourdough mentorship, and other things. So please check out our website for that kind of stuff. And we're also having a silent auction that we're asking people to buy gift certificates from local businesses so that those businesses can thrive while they're closed or soon to be open, but at 25%. And so we're doing a local virtual silent auction. So that's another way you can support us. But yeah, money is always key.
Well, I think also I want to lift up, we've known this for a long time, but state legislatures are so critically important in fighting back against the Trump administration. And so any dollars that you're able to give that are that can be used for political means, especially donations to the PACs, are incredibly valuable resources for our NARAL colleagues. So I really want to encourage folks, if you're able to give, that money is particularly powerful. Kate, what's next?
Great. And Mallory, I saw you pop some links in the chat, which I passed along too, and we'll work on getting some path links in there as well. But feel free, staff from the other two organizations, feel free to pop those in. Another question is, can someone briefly touch on, what self-managed abortion is and why it's so important right now?
Sure.
I'm happy to do it, but Aimee also and Mallory, please go for it.
Sure. And obviously, please jump in. Self-managed abortion is when someone chooses to perform their abortion outside of a medical setting. It can be for a number of reasons, that you can't get to a medical setting, that, you don't trust the providers that are available to you. Self-managed abortion includes a number of different methods, any that a person might use, whether it's herbs or medication or manual aspiration. However, what Aimee referenced earlier and what most self-managed abortion advocacy talks about is abortion with pills, which is safe, and the World Health Organization, as Aimee mentioned, has misoprostol on the list as an essential medicine, and has an available protocol that you can find on their website on how to do that. And it is something that, you can buy just about anything on the internet. And yeah.
Wait, Kate, let's
Great.
do one more question. And
One
then I'll
more.
transition us off.
Oh my gosh, there's so many good ones. And if we don't get to yours and you're still curious, let me know. This is a hard one to finish up with, but why do you think legislatures in your states are so different from the predominant public opinion when it comes to believing in abortion? That's not the right word, but supporting abortion rights.
In Texas, it's definitely gerrymandering. When the state was redistricting in 2009, kind of right around 2009, 2010, when the Tea Party was coming, at their height, a lot of the redistricting that happened in Texas skewed very anti-abortion. And so we went from having like 5 anti-abortion bills introduced each legislative session to about 45. And so that's kind of demonstrative of what happened to our districts. They look very, very different than they used to. And that's my theory.
I think it's really important to stress that voting rights are absolutely critical to creating a pro-choice majority in this state at every level, at the state level, at the county level, at the federal level. I mean, I think voting rights are kind of the foundation of our ability to make change. And so Stacey Abrams has said this so incredibly eloquently, but if you believe in choice, you need to be fighting for the ability of folks to cast a fair and free ballot. So just such an important point. And, the gerrymandering, it is shocking and affects this country profoundly.
One thing I do want to add, sorry, that I didn't say, is that anti-abortion people use the word abortion 4 to 1 times more than our side, which allows them to shape the narrative, which is why some of the medical inaccuracy and flat out lies that they spread resonate with people, is because they hear them so much more often, which is one of the reasons why at NARAL Pro-Choice Texas, we've tried to take back the word abortion by having abortion t-shirts, abortion in everything we do, abortion hearts, abortion Texases, because I think the anti-abortion movement has done such a good job taking that word and associating it with negative lies. And that's another reason I think that that's kind of perpetuated, especially in Texas.
Yeah,
Mallory,
it's very similar in Missouri redistricting. And I think that something that we hear from folks is exactly what Aimee said, that if they are progressive, abortion isn't necessarily their number one issue. And so they're going to vote on all these other issues and kind of think that that's someone else's thing to worry about. And we also see, especially as we talk to Democrats that are running in some far out parts of the state, that they are, of course, they're pro-choice, but they're scared to talk about it and they're scared to talk to their neighbors. And so because of that stigma around it, people aren't talking about it, and you're not realizing that, oh, your neighbor and your friend on the school board probably are also supportive. But there's a fear. And so I think that that work that Texas is doing, and the work that we are all doing to kind of fight stigma, to reclaim abortion, and to recognize abortion as a public good is so critical. I hear folks say to me a lot, well, you know, no one wants an abortion. I'm like, yes, people want abortions. We want abortion. It is a positive thing in people's lives. And we cannot say that enough.
Well, the two of you, I'm so glad that that, you know, the supporters of NARAL Massachusetts got to see the two of you in action, because you're both so incredibly smart and inspiring, and you make me want to work harder and stronger. And I'm just so grateful that that you spent an hour with all of us today. So thank you for that. You know, we in Massachusetts fight a lot to tell people that you can't take reproductive freedom for granted, and we can't get complacent with the status quo. We have to push to make Massachusetts a leader, and we have to dream big and fight hard and be really unafraid to be bold, because, you know, in 30 years, when the pendulum swings back for on the High Court, Massachusetts needs to be setting the pace, and it's so inspiring to hear from you guys, and makes me want to just do more. So so thank you. If you enjoyed today's check-in and you want to get more involved with us, you can click on our volunteer link in the chat box to sign up for our volunteer list. Tomorrow night, the Raise Up Massachusetts Coalition is hosting a virtual town hall about their emergency sick time legislation, and we hope you will join it. And I know that link is going to be in the chat box. And if you want to continue to support our digital advocacy efforts during the COVID-19 pandemic, please consider donating to our digital organizing fund. You can find a link to donate in the chat box. You know, like every other organization, we are innovating and iterating to this new reality. And for us, that means continuing the fight for reproductive freedom online. So every little bit helps. Even $5 makes a big difference for us. So please donate if you're inclined to do so. And just mindful of time, I just want to tell you about next week. We are going to have Annabelle Santiago on, who's the grassroots coordinator for the Coalition for Social Justice. She will be here on behalf of the Raise Up Massachusetts Coalition to talk about emergency paid sick time, which would give an additional 10 days or 80 hours of emergency paid sick leave to workers not covered under the Families First Act during the COVID-19 pandemic. We think this is a reproductive justice bill, and we really want to talk to all of you about it, and have you hear from Annabelle about the work and why it's so incredibly important to reproductive freedom. So join you can click the link in the chat box if you want to contact your legislators in support of the bill, and also to sign up for next week. We'll be back Tuesdays at 2. I'm so grateful to spend an hour with the two of you this afternoon, and so grateful to all the folks who showed up. So thank you. Be well, everybody.